Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Friday, June 30th, 2023, and this is episode 764 of Living Free in Tennessee. And it's a Friday, so we're doing Homestead happenings. And look, I got my hair cut. Can you tell? You probably can't tell. It's still super long. I got about 2 or 3 inches cut off, and we layered in the bottom part so that it's a little fluffier. That's about it. But that's what happens when you have super ultra long hair and need to get a haircut. It's kind of a challenge, I think, for most hairdressers because they're used to people shoulder length or so. And the super long hair down to your tailbone is not in the standard everyday life at this point. Yes, much wave. That's because I had it up in my clippy thing until today's episode. Anyway, today we're going to talk about the heat of summer. And we had somebody in one of our feeds lose a chicken because it got too hot. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and livestock and keeping them cool and how to keep them cool and whether to keep them cool. We're going to talk about chicken nuggets, baby ducklings, processing garlic, interesting new forage, all of the fun stuff on this episode of Homestead Happenings. If you are in the live feed, do me a favor. Like and share this show with somebody who you think might be interested in it. We're getting close to our millionth download right now on the audio podcast. And I'm going to give away 1,000,000 Satoshis to somebody. And we're going to start talking about how that works. But one of the ways it will work is that I'm going to ask you to submit your favorite episode or episodes, and we're going to start sharing those out to people. And if you participate in that project, you will go into the drawing for the 1,000,000 Satoshis, which I have already transferred to a wallet. So you will get control of that. And if you've never messed with Bitcoin or anything before, I guess I'll have to teach you how, huh? That kind of comes with the lesson, right? So definitely like this. If you're new to the channel, like and subscribe if you want to see future things that we talk about here at Living Free in Tennessee. Our featured event of today's show is Sunday. This Sunday at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Mountain, 2 p.m. Pacific. For 4 hours, I will be live with Toolman Tim. You guys remember the live radio show that we did about the last quarter? We've decided that's a great quarterly thing. Well, this time it's not that exactly. You see, one of our community members, Jenni Hill, has cancer, and she was just kicked out of her free trial. She was in a clinical trial that covered her treatment. And so she is been kicked out of that. She is now responsible for whatever she decides to do financially. She does have health insurance, but it doesn't cover things that she wants to do. It doesn't cover much, actually. So we're raising money for her to help her have the flexibility to make the choices for her own health that she can make, as well as cover living expenses because she's not able to work at this time. So that is going to be live at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central. We're going to do a live auction. We are also bringing folks on to talk about how Jenni has impacted her life. There are a number of people in the Living Free in Tennessee community who have been in really bad situations, and she has helped them out of those situations. I want to hear your stories. I want to have a tribute to her just so she knows we love her. And if you want to share your story live, there is a link in the show notes. And I'm going to put it in the live chat to submit that you want to be on the live show. And then if everybody who's submitted already, by the way, you're going to be on the live show. I haven't emailed about that. We'll bring you on to tell your story. If you're just too shy for that, email me, Nicole@livingfreeintennessee.com. Send me an email and I will read it. And we will just talk about Jenni. We will highlight the awesome auction items. We have a guaranteed ticket to Jack Spirko's fall workshop. We have a super pass to Self-Reliance Festival. We have coffee of the month from Holler Roast. We have coffee from Food Forest Farms. We have a free tech consulting from Tom, who does all of the things about he does website development, web server maintenance, keeps things secure. He knows a lot about technology. He has been involved in some lightning builds. So if you know what lightning is and you're like, how do I do that? He's not a bad guy to talk to about that. So lots of really cool stuff over there. that you can get on auction while helping Jenni out. Also, if you want to donate an auction item, you better get it in today, Friday. There's a link at jennihill.livingfreeintennessee.com for you to do that. Anyway, the link to the live stream is in the show notes, as well as if you come to my YouTube channel, it will stream there. If you go to Toolman Tim's channel, it will stream there. If you go to Jack Spirko's channel, it will stream there. And anybody listening to this who's like, I want to add my channel to that, reach out to me, because I will add as many channels as I can for the live stream this Sunday. Also want to thank our two show sponsors today. The first one is DiscountMylarBags.com. That's right. Toby from Discount Mylar Bags took his superpower. Okay, guys. So a lot of us think we are inadequate, and we enter our communities and we're like, these people all know how to do all of these things. And I don't know how to do anything, and I'm not very physically fit or whatever. And how do I like help in my community? And I don't know what to do. And that's kind of how Toby felt. He's like, I'm not a gun badass, and I'm not a homesteader, and I'm not a, this or that. And he thought, well, you know what I know how to do? I know how to source things in bulk for cheap. And I know how to pass that discount on to my community so we can get the things we need, like Mylar bags for food storage. And that's how Discount Mylar Bags started. He also never wants people to buy the wrong size bag or the wrong thing. So he's put together at Discount Mylar Bags a bunch of resources that you can use to figure out how to best store your food. It's on the right-hand side of the site. That's discountmylarbags.com. He also provides every hollow roast coffee bag you've ever gotten a pound of coffee in. And sorry, it's warm in here, and my hair down by my ears is not making me very happy right now. Okay, our second sponsor of today's show is Strong Roots Resources. That's Carrie Brown, for those of you who are active in the network and have seen him posting things online. Carrie Brown has some really cool offerings that he can bring to you. He does consultations, specializes in smaller properties, and they are permaculture consultations. But he's added something pretty darn slick. He does a bunch of wild edible walks, and can identify and geolocate on your property the wild things that you may not know are beneficial that are beneficial on your land. Check that out, strongrootresources.com. But that is time for the first segment of today's show, which is not one of our usual segments. Nope. I want to talk about heat and livestock because we've had a couple things happen in our community chats. And if you're interested in joining us on social networks, we have Living Free in Tennessee on Telegram. That's t.me/LFTN group. We have Living Free in Tennessee Coffee Break group on Facebook. We have Living Free in Tennessee on MeWe. And we even have Living Free in Tennessee on freesteading.com. Lots of ways to interact with our community. And it's a bunch of really great people. So I recommend you get over there and sign up if you are interested in connecting with other people interested in the sorts of things we talk about at Living Free in Tennessee. But somebody came out and said, well, I've had my first casualty to the heat, and they came out, one of their chickens was dead, and it looked like it got too hot and the chicken died. And here's the thing about raising livestock is they are outside animals. And if we bring them inside, they become less resilient. So Amy Dingman did a great little video about this. She said, she lives in Minnesota Wisconsin. Anyway, she lives where your face hurts when you go outside in the winter. And she did a show, just a little video about how she does not bring her livestock in. They do have access to shelter and a barn. But if she did that, she would kill them because letting them back outside to, eat grass or whatever in the middle of winter, they would no longer be acclimated to the environment. And so when you take something like a livestock guardian dog in the middle of winter into your home, which is 70 or 75 degrees or whatever you keep your house at, or 68, or that's many degrees higher than below freezing, right? That's a shock. And they have developed thicker fur for the winter to help protect themselves. And when you bring them in, it's like throwing them into a sweat lodge. And that extreme change is very difficult. So if you do need to bring an animal in the winter, you're committing to keeping that animal in until it's a good time to acclimate them back to the outdoors. And we talked about this the other day, just about when we were talking about on the live feed, when we were talking about doing first aid on your animals, and you bring one in who's sick, and then 30 days later it's not sick and it's also -3 outside, you can't bring them outside until it gets warmer again. So you are committing to triaging and keeping the separate sick animal who's no longer sick in that situation. Likewise, when it's super hot outside and you've done the same thing, you've brought an animal in to take care of it and then you put it back outside, it can die. However, here's what happens at this time of year. Your weak animals are going to be really sensitive to the heat and they may die. And you want to find ways for them to be able to cool themselves, sensitive or not sensitive, so that they are able to make it through these hard times. And that means shade, airflow. For the sheep, frozen bottles of water that they can snuggle up to. That works for poultry. If there is a creek or a pond nearby, having access to that, keeping them watered is really important. But what you don't want to do is bring them into your air-conditioned house. And I just thought I'd open that up. If there are other ways that you kind of give your animals access to cooling off, let me know. Like having your rabbits in the direct sun today when it's going to be 100 degrees here with no way to get out of it because they're in little cages will kill them. We lost a rabbit last year who just happened to be giving birth in the middle of a heat wave. We have another one this weekend who's doing that. I'm working with Tactical later today to figure out where she's going to go on the property because we have microclimates on the property, which will be 5 or 10 degrees cooler. So I may put her in a cage there. So it's a subtle difference in temperature. So I don't need to bring her into my mudroom and smell rabbit in my mudroom for the next 6 months, right? Other people who use the stun method just let their animals, like they still give them access to shade and all that and water, but they figure if they're too weak to make it through, they're too weak. That's a decision you make on your own homestead. But I know that we do think about keeping animals cool, keeping them in water. We've been really lucky here in this particular heat streak that it's been cool at night and we have had rain. So even today, it's going to get up to 100. And then this afternoon, we have thunder showers, which when it rains, it just drops that temperature 20 degrees or so. But then the sun comes out and then the humidity rises and then your heat index goes way up. So that's really, really freaky. Yeah. Tennessee Permaculture says access to the woods really helps. In fact, the sheep paddock right now is about half woods. And that was done with purpose because we saw this heat time coming. And, you know, that Tactical always likes to make sure they have access to things like trees to get under. Likewise, if you're overly warm and you don't have air conditioning, you can go into the woods and cool off. Watch out for the ticks and sugars and snakes, but that's something you can do. I know my off-grid air conditioning plan, if I don't have electricity and can't run the air conditioner, is to put on my swimsuit and walk down to the creek where 55-degree water is coming out of the ground in this one little creek, like Dunkin' hole, and sit there if I need to. That's how I can cool down anytime. And that water coming out of the ground is always cold. So that's a good one. We also have a place called Air Conditioning Cave. That's just a cave that opens up onto the road and it blows out cool air. And the air is about 65 degrees. So in the wintertime, it's warm air. And in the summertime, it's cool air. And this cave is written about in old histories of my road. So it's been there a long time. When they put city water in, they filled it in. So there's a water pipe down there now. They filled it in. And then because the way the cave was made was water, every time it rains a lot, water like is underground and there's pressure. And that just busted out all the dirt that they packed in there because basically the people who install city water don't know what they're doing from a hydrology or geology standpoint. They dig the hole, they bust through anything that gets in their way, they put the pipes in. And it is what it is. It's kind of funny where I was talking to somebody the other day who said, you know, locals told me not to put this small culvert in, and I ignored them because I'd already bought the culvert. And it turned out they were right, and I had to buy a second culvert because when the runoff came, it totally blew out my driveway. Locals know what's going on. Like we could have told them not to do that. And a couple of other things they did with the water line, and it would have been way better for them. But they were like, no, we have heavy equipment. We can do what we want. And I'm like, okay, go ahead and just see how Mother Nature's water power works for your system. And as a result, water lines have broken on our road. because you know what happens when it's -5 degrees and your water pipe is exposed because you put it in a cave that has water blow out of it every year? I know what happens. Didn't happen to me though, because I'm not on city water. I didn't sign up for that. Anyway, that's my thought. Autumn Dawn says, I would put a garden hose on mist and spray my chickens. You can do that too. Mike Leonito says, it's never been hot enough here that I've had to do anything. And A. Ray Pierce says, my rabbits get porcelain tiles that have been in the freezer. That's a great idea for rabbits. I might actually do that for my pregnant rabbit in case she cares. Tennessee Permaculture says, I'm peeling the fur off my dog and have enough fur for a sweater. They do. They like totally drop all their fur at this point when we start getting into the time of year when we have the heat, the oven turn on. Basically, the oven actually waited for a while this year, so I got cabbage, I got broccoli, I have more broccoli out there to harvest. I'm gonna get Brussels sprouts, I think, except for it's gonna be 100 degrees today, so we'll see what they think about that. If I rush out there by noon and get some shade cloth off, I might still be okay. We'll see. Yesterday was not a day for me to do that. Next segment is forage. This is where we talk about what's coming off the land. And I talked about it last week, but mullein has these big stalks and it's flowering, and it's about time to start harvesting mullein flower if you want mullein flower instead of leaves, or you let it go to seed and then you take it's like these seed wands and you go, bring on the mullein, right? Mulleins a great herbal for colds and breathing complaints. And if you have it grow, I mean, it's something I was really attracted to the year I had pneumonia, and I didn't know why. And then I started reading about it when I had pneumonia because I had nothing else to do but sit. And I started making mullein tea. And in 2020, that's what we used when we had COVID. Was we had mullein and peppermint tea to help support our breathing. Last week I talked about yarrow and how we don't have any here, and then Carrie Brown from strongrootsresources.com reached out and said, do you want me to bring you some next time I'm out in your area? And I said, yes, please. And then I went outside and I was working in my food forest, and I looked down and there was yarrow, and I looked over and there was more yarrow. So we have yarrow coming on the homestead. And I texted him back and I said, as it turns out, I have yarrow in my food forest. Carrie, you know what? Carrie put it there because he was selling yarrow plants at our food forest install. I'm pretty sure it was either that or at my spring workshop. I don't know which. And I do now remember him saying, hey, I have a few extra yarrow plants. Want me to throw them in your food forest? And I said, yes. And then, miracle of miracles, I did not misidentify that plant and weed it later when I've been maintaining the food forest. So we have yarrow, and I'm very excited about that. And I started reading about all of the benefits and how to harvest it and what to harvest and how to make a tincture. And that's going to be really cool. The other thing is wood sorrel is up and around. And I've always noticed wood sorrel, and I didn't know what it was. And then I like to learn a new wild edible plant every year that see it through the seasons and really be confident about identifying it. And wood sorrel is that plant that looks like clover, but is clearly not clover. And I've noticed it around. So I just thought I'd mention that. Go check out wood sorrel, read about it. It's something you can eat like greens. It has a lemony flavor, and you can put it in salads. You can put it in sautés. I'm totally going to mix that into some of the sautés we do. What I find at this time of year is that my garden is coming on, but sort of the greens that I would cook are waning, right? Like the Swiss chard doesn't love it super hot, although it usually makes it through the summer. And the spinach has already told me to pound sand. The lettuce greens are done. I've got some bolting lettuce, so I'm just going to let go to seed and see what happens in the fall. But I have Malabar spinach, so we're eating that. I have Forever spinach, which is not spinach, which is a spinach tasting thing that is also very hardy in the in the world of hot, which we deal with here in Tennessee. And it's very easy to propagate. It has health benefits. It's a good cleanse for just general stuff. Jack Spirko gave me a plant when I was down in May, and I put it in my aquaponics system, and now I have 3 plants, and hopefully I'll have 6 or 8 plants by the end of the year. You take it in for the winter into a pot in your house, and hopefully we can make that happen. I did manage to keep a tomato alive last year, so we'll see how that goes. But I always end up finding greens coming off the land. So we were eating this last week, a little bit of Swiss chard were my greens, but I also had lamb's quarter. So we have lamb's quarter that I'm just letting grow in certain different places. People hate it because it takes over the world. I love it because it takes over the world. And the greens, before it blooms, I just cut all the tips off and saute those up. Delicious, delicious in a saute with a little bit of squash and onions. Janet Zabo says, wood sorrel is a noxious weed in my garden. Yep. I know how you feel about that because I have perilla that other people like as a wild edible, and it takes over everything if I let it get out of hand. So I feel your pain there, Janet. I feel your pain. So I'm just learning about wood sorrel, and I will report back on recipes that we come up with it. The last of the daylilies are blooming. I think they'll be done soon. Gooseberries, the last of the gooseberries are coming on. We got wild blackberries last weekend, so those are in my fridge. I harvested 2 pints of those, and I've been sprinkling them on salads. Very delicious. And then, of course, all the mints and herbs are coming on. I have dehydrated my first oregano, and it's almost ready for me to harvest another 1/2 bushel. So oregano is doing really well this year. I was also really pleased to see that I have 2 or 3 rosemary plants alive. One is thriving. So that might be the one. We'll see. I have put so many rosemary plants out that have died. Next segment is livestock. This is where we talk about what we're doing with the critters. And I am paying attention to water and how the sun hits cages on the rabbits. The chickens are all set. The ducks are all set. The sheep are all set. The goats are all set for being able to keep themselves cool. But because we keep our rabbits in cages right now, need to be really careful about that late afternoon sun coming in at an angle and hang shade. We had to move the rabbit cage because a tree fell and landed on the power line, and it was right by the rabbit cages. And then the crews came out to cut the tree up, and we moved the rabbit cages to a different location. So right now they are in a spot where the afternoon sun can hit them, and I do not want to kill all the rabbits, because finally we're getting bunnies off of bunnies and feeding them to dogs and all of that cool stuff. We still haven't processed all the rabbits. I said we were going to process last week. So, we'll talk later about how the stomach flu hit the hauler this week, and that has impacted abilities to process things. We have our second round of ducklings coming on in 5 days, assuming that the incubation went well. I already candled all the eggs. I was able to show the Eversoles how candling eggs works. And I kicked out all the eggs that were bad. And usually from here, we'll get about 50% hatch rate on the duck eggs. I have brought the humidity level in the incubator up. I'm trying to keep it near 90%. It is only at 80% right now. So I will check that later today, but we're keeping that a lot of water going through that to keep the humidity high, because we want the shell to be soft enough that the little hatchlings can hatchling themselves. Today is our first vet appointment for the livestock guardian dogs. And it is why we are not doing a hauler neighbor chat after this, because around noon, it is time for me to help Tactical start wrangling the LGDs into the car, which I expect to be challenging. And then they're getting just their annual shots. I don't have a vet who will come out and do that. Hopefully I'll find one, because moving LGDs who are not trained to be dogs, like my dogs, is, well, they're 150-pound animals. So they're going to do what they do. I know that one of them I can get in the car. There's one of them I'm not sure he will get in the car. So we'll just see how that goes. And if that doesn't work, then I need to figure out how to get his rabies another way. But hopefully this will start socializing them towards getting in the car. We'll see. The chicken compost yard is set up 1.0. 2.0 will be built. And we put up 2 gallons of chicken scraps. Kitchen. The word chicken and the word kitchen are very similar. And sometimes when I'm podcasting, I will say the wrong one. And you can just yell at your audio podcast, kitchen, when they hear me say chicken for my kitchen, and the other way around. That's your job, not mine. The chicken compost yard 1.0 is up. We put 2 gallons of scraps out and the chickens went nuts. I did add wood chips to it just to keep smell down because there are some meat products in there. Yes, I'm letting them be carnivores because they will eat a rat, they will eat bugs, they will eat that stuff. And I have a lot more scrap to put out than the chickens probably can eat right now, but it's so far it's working beautifully. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes. The baby ducks got moved. So we had the baby ducks and the baby chickens all together because that's the space we had because the chicken tractor is being moved for the meat birds. Meat birds are gone. Ducks are now in the chicken tractor with a temporary duck yard put up. And if you saw the webinar Leos did on how to raise small livestock, and he put pictures of some of his early setups up that had this temporary fencing, like deer netting, basically. That's what we're using because what we want the ducklings to do is learn to go into a coop at night and come out during the day and into a coop at night as we train them, which the ducklings that are out there, they're 6 weeks old now, they have learned. But I had not given them a swimming pool with the chickens because I wasn't sure how that was going to go. And I wasn't around to observe it and make sure they were big enough to get out again. Well, they're big enough now. So they saw water for the first time. Tactical told me he really wished he would have had a video out there because it was the best day of their life when they found out I can go swimming. Hopefully we'll get video of them when they discover the pond for the first time. What we're doing right now, though, is we're working on acclimating them or making them familiar with the other ducks on the property. So they're over near the duck coop and they have a yard that's fenced off and they can see each other through the fencing. So they're like, oh, you're a duck too. And what will happen over time as we are more confident that they're ready to free range is we will let them out in the evening with the ducks and everybody will hang out and then everybody will go to their 2 separate places. After a few weeks of that, there will be this big day that involves 2 to 3 people herding ducks, and all ducks go to bed. We will drive them to the primary coop, the permanent coop. It takes about 2-3 days of doing that, and they all start sleeping together, and it's fine. I've done this a number of times, and the reason I do it this way is that these ducks were incubated, and I don't want them hurt by the other ducks. So I want everybody to be like, oh, you're a duck. You're part of the duck flock thing. And usually the ducks will separate themselves into their own little groups based on age. But sometimes they'll cross, like they'll change. But the thing is, what we don't want is the drake or any of the other female ducks getting mad at little baby ducks and attacking them, which probably, I mean, like doesn't usually happen, but just to make sure, we let them become familiar with each other before we start having them sleep together at night. So we're probably, Tactical and I have to talk about timeline on this. We may wait for the other ducklings to be 6 weeks who are being born this week and do it all with one. So we may leave it this way for another 6 weeks while the little ducklings brood with the bigger ducklings and they all get to know each other. Because the other thing we can do is they become familiar to each other with the brooder, and the brooder is in the tractor. So that's all happening right now. And then the goats are out grazing on my property finally. And so far, nobody has gotten out, even though they totally could, but they don't like being shocked. And that's really good because there's a lot of underbrush to eat here. I haven't brought the sheep through this year yet. So since the winter sheep were here. And things are growing. And the whole purpose of having ruminants is that I do not want to weed whack and I do not want to mow. So their job is to weed whack and mow for me. That cannot happen if they are not here eating the things. The goats are not as good at eating the grass, but they are getting into all of the nasty vines that grow places and the underbrush and those sorts of things. And so far it's working well. We'll see how it works next week. You know, when we first opened up their pasture, which they've basically been locked in for a year, unless I tethered them out. When we opened it up, nobody wanted to go out past the point where the gate is. But by a couple days later, they were going out. They really like to hang out in their barn when it's hot out because that's their shelter. But they go out periodically and nibble on the things. Next segment is grow. This is where we talk about what we're growing on the homestead. The green beans are ready to harvest. They were ready yesterday for a big harvest. And then we had not only crazy rain, but lightning. So I did not go out and harvest the green beans. I also had a schedule I had a 5 o'clock call. And by the time that was done, that's when the lightning was here. So I decided not to risk my health by getting zapped by lightning, and green beans can wait a day. So today I better get them though. So the green beans are ready. Hopefully I'll get enough to can some. I'll report next week on if we do. My first planting of green beans looks great. And I have both pole beans and bush beans. The bush beans are producing. The pole beans are not yet producing. They come about 2 weeks after the bush beans, so they take a little bit longer. I've been adding other green beans other places about every 2 weeks, and my next planting doesn't look as good. Last year, my third planting was the one that did well. So by rotating every 2 weeks of planting, I end up with green beans. What's supposed to magically happen is they're all supposed to do well, and we have this rotation of green beans. But what I have found is some plantings do better than others, and I just keep it up. So we are harvesting garlic this weekend, and I will do one more planting of green beans, squash, and cucumbers to hopefully get that all done. And I'm going to check the potatoes. Yes, I grow potatoes. No, I don't eat potatoes very often, but I eat some. So getting a quarter bushel of potatoes every year is great. And then I save some of them and I put them back in the ground, and I don't have to buy potatoes most of the time. We did buy potatoes to serve at the spring workshop in April because we had already used the potatoes from last year. But Thanksgiving and Christmas, I usually do mashed potatoes, and those potatoes come from here. That's the cool thing about gardening is once you get a cycle going of I plant it, I harvest it, and I reuse it for seed, you're no longer buying all the seeds all the time. You're just buying all the new seeds that you're interested all the time. Now, this year I spent about $20 on seeds this year just because I wanted some other varieties of things. And then things like yellow crookneck squash or zucchini, I don't save seeds for those because it's difficult to save them. They don't do terribly well in my garden anyway. So I just get a couple packets of seeds every year and put them in again. My cushaw squash, my tromboncino squash, and my butternut squash, I do save seeds from, and that's a whole different chapter of things. Last year, I made a whole new variety of squash. I had like cushaw squash, but half of it was green and half was yellow, and I can only surmise that it is cross-pollinated with either the butternut squash or probably more likely the tromboncino. And Mike Leonito says seed catalog season is bad for the budget. That's right. Especially when they put out the big, colorful, glossy things. Brussels sprouts, as I said, are about ready. I don't know what's going to happen to them today. I'm a little worried. They're like tiny little pea-sized Brussels sprouts. They were tiny little fingernails, like pinky fingernail-sized Brussels sprouts last week. So they're growing very slowly. I love Brussels sprouts. I'm hoping I'll get some. I may freeze dry some if I do get them. We'll see. I've never freeze dried those before. Swiss chard is going strong. The aquaponics chard is doing way better than the garden chard. And I think that's because the aquaponics system doesn't get quite as hot, even though it's under Taj Mahaler. There's a little bit of a shade effect of the the quote unquote clear roofing. And then they are like in the aquaponics system, because it's a wicking bed technology, they are getting ideal water. Up in the main garden, they're mulched in, but they get the water they get. And sometimes, like this year, we had sort of that droughty thing and it wasn't as good. I did put automated watering up there, so they are getting watered twice a week now. My peas are done. I'm going to get like one more pea off of that, pull the vines out, plant either a climbing squash, climbing cucumbers, or pole beans there on that trellis and see what happens. But I noticed like they were like, we don't like it hot, it happens every year. It's about time to harvest onions. I wish they were bigger than they are, but I think I'm going to pull them out. I'm going to go look. I'm going to pull a few out and decide. But this was the first year I actually grew onions in about a decade that Egyptian walking onions or green onions or those sorts of things. And it's just because we go through about 110 pounds of onions a year. And so I thought, well, I'll put in 100 onions and I will see how we go. And the more I start growing them, the better I get at it. And that's the thing about gardening, guys, is you get good at things through repetition. You forget how things grow. And if you stop doing something, like I stopped growing bulb onions, then you have to relearn it. So even if I only get half-sized onions, I get some onion volume and we'll go from there. I did not grow them from seed. I bought little onion bulblets, and I may actually start some from seed. We'll see, because it's a much longer cycle. If you start them from seed, you start them in the fall, and it's a much longer cycle until you get the bulbing out of the onion. So it is kind of nice to get them. Michael says, do you clear the pea residue to make room for the next crop, or will they just climb over the old vines? I clear the pea residue and I compost it because it's hard for me to see what's going on. And in fact, where my peas are behind the trellis, a lot of wild edible things are growing, like hairy vetch. So the hairy vetch is all mixed up in the peas, which is kind of ironic because they taste like pea shoots, the flowers do. So I'm going to pull that all out, beat it down, put seed bags over the top of it on that side of the trellis, and then grow beans from the east facing side of the trellis. That is my plan for that. And then, of course, I will be curing the garlic. So I'm going to Montana to the Permaculture Technology Jamboree. I leave Monday at the crack of dawn. And I'm looking forward to it. I'll be there for 5 days, and I don't know when I'm coming back. We'll talk about that in a bit because there's some other stuff going on in the background. So this is the time of year where you need to be in your garden all the time, like taking care of stuff. And I can't if I'm not in town. So I am leaving it as best I can. I need to get the garlic out, and I will succession plant some other things there. The reason I'm not succession planting before I harvest the garlic is the earth gets disturbed when you pull up the garlic. But then it's time to cure the garlic. So I pull the garlic and I do not wash it. I brush off the soil. I actually put off harvesting it from this weekend because it rained, so that the soil was a little drier and less of it stuck to the garlic. And then we got so much rain yesterday. So I'm running out of time, and I'm going to get more rain today. So I'm just going to end up having to harvest it out of wetter than I would like soil. Harvest it. I then spread it out where each bulb can get airflow. And I usually use my clothes drying rack for this because I don't need a dedicated thing for that. But then it reduces how many clothes I can dry outside. And I'll even hang it with the stalks sometimes on that. And I let it dry outside in a non-sunny place, so under cover, for 2 weeks. And what happens during that time is if you don't do this, you'll bring garlic inside and use it, and that's totally fine. It will peel like a banana. It doesn't have that papery outer shell, really. And so you'll have this like thick thing that peels like a banana, and you can use the garlic, and that's fine. In fact, I will use some of the garlic fresh that way. No big deal. When you cure it for 2 weeks, like outside or in a barn or in a cool place in your garage, or if you're Michael Leonito, you put it on your dining room table, however you do that, that banana peel like thing gets to be hard, and it protects the garlic and helps preserve it. And that thing, then it's like the garlic you get at the store where you have to actually pull this hard, dehydrated outer husk off of the garlic before you use it. So it's part of the process of getting my garlic ready to store for the winter that I'm doing that. The reason I need to get out of the ground now is if you leave it in the ground too long, that rots, and then your garlic doesn't last as long. And what we will do with the garlic from there, I let it sit for 2 weeks. I cut the garlic like leaves off or whatever, the stem. And then I assess which garlic, if it got hit by a shovel, if it looks like it's googly, like that gets used first. I take the biggest garlic, put that aside for replanting in the fall. And then the rest of it goes into my storage for just like root cellar storage. And I usually put it in the prepper pantry. I start it in the house though, because it's cooler in my house at this time of year than in the prepper pantry. And I don't want to cool the prepper pantry. So that's what I will do. That'll last through the winter. And right before the spring workshop, it starts wanting to sprout in cold storage. And those ones I take and I grind up and I freeze dry them. And freeze dried garlic is a dream to cook with. So That's the whole garlic story. Next segment is holler neighbors and community. Well, we had the stomach flu arrive this week, and it arrived, I guess, Tuesday in the form of taking the tactical redneck out, and he is primarily responsible for animals. So the good news is, and I have some stomach complaints going on, but I didn't get like the fever and the body aches. So I have been basically staying away from in-person interactions with holler neighbors just in case I have it too. Don't know. And I stayed away from him just in case I don't have it. So we've been doing sort of like the contactless pass off of food from outside to inside his cabin and things of that nature. And he's better now. He's not better, but he's over the part where you have the fever and the aches. But keeping up with the animals is hard, and I also did not feel wonderful. So the Eversoles and Nighthawk have pitched in to help take care of the sheep, which are off property. So that was super helpful, and we needed to make sure they stayed in water. Nighthawk picked up things from the store for us so that we actually added kombucha back in because the gut biome got totally nuked by the things that were happening. We won't go into too much detail on that. And I was out of kefir water. And so I have other ferments. I have sauerkraut and other things fermented, and we've been hitting those too here. And it's been way better with community than if it was just the two of us on this homestead and we didn't know anybody, because we were both kind of weak. We would have gotten it done. We would have reverted to what is the no-kill list. But thankfully, we had a little extra help. Nighthawk also went around my homestead the first day when it was acute and made sure everybody had water. And then after he left, I went around and made sure everybody was closed in for the night and had food because I knew where the food was. So that all worked well. Chicken class would not have happened without community because, as you know, I went to my uncle's funeral that week before and I was not here getting ready for the chicken class. My friend Oxy came out and she helped me get things all set up, gave me time to peacefully cook the lunchtime, pre-cook the lunchtime meals, and that worked great. And the holler neighbors came over and made sure setup happened. They came to the event, made sure processing happened for all the birds. They stayed when everybody left and made sure everything was cleaned up and put away. This was the smoothest it's ever gone. And without community around me, that would have not happened. And then, of course, the last thing going on in the Living Free in Tennessee community is Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central, on my YouTube channel, on Toolman Tim's YouTube channel, and on Jack Spirko's YouTube channel is the fundraiser for Jenni Hill. So do consider participating in that. If that time doesn't work for you, you can still participate in the online auction. That's jennihill.livingfreeintennessee.com. Next segment is infrastructure. We had the flu. Nothing happened. Nothing happened except for I told you about the whole pressure bladder change out under Operation Independence on Monday. So we don't need to rehash that. Next segment, and this is the last segment of the show. I'm going to take the questions that I have starred. There are 2 right now, and then we're going to wrap up. We are not doing a Holler Neighbor live stream right after this because we're going to go move dogs next. And I need to go help move dogs and not be online while we're doing that. So the chicken class. People wonder about how finances work on the homestead. And, you know, you hear about like you raise chickens, you sell tickets to a class that offsets the food and you get everything for free, right? That's not what happens. The cost we have per bird for a non-heritage bird, for a non-Cornish cross bird, so we raised more of a heritage bird. The benefit of that was that they were way cleaner. They grew slower. I have more thigh meat and less breast meat, which I like. And if I had wanted to, I probably could have kept them to reproduce themselves. So we processed them at 12 or 13 weeks. And the thing we learned about this breed is they waste food more than the Cornish cross. And so we did all sorts of things until we figured out how to keep them from wasting food. And we had about $16 or $16.50 in each bird, just cost. That's buying the bird. That's the electricity. That's vitamins, and that's feed. That's not labor. So $16 per bird. That is up from $12.50. 13, 14, 15, 16. That's $4 more per bird. Now, birds went up a couple of bucks. Feed was more expensive because of the food waste, and that's where it went. That's basically where it went. So with the class sales and the expenses of the class, we profited, in air quotes, about $480. That's after all the expenses of the class is taken into consideration. Now we can use that to reduce our feed bill a little bit. And that means we actually spent money on our birds this year, even though we had the class. Now, my motivation for having the class is to keep people learning how to process birds. And if people end up using my equipment for birds, they've been through the class, they know how to use my equipment for the birds, because we will let people come here and process if it's prearranged. So that's the reality of the finances of the class. Now, had I sold more tickets, that number would be higher for profit. That would offset more feed, but there would be fewer chickens in the freezer because everybody goes home with their own bird. So I like to keep the class at about $95 a class. I think that is a reasonable fee. We are charging $195 for the class we're doing in Camden, Tennessee in October with Joel Salatin. That's because we have Joel Salatin there, and Joel Salatin costs money. But that's your next opportunity to take the class. He will start by showing us how he processes chickens. We're featuring Featherman Scalder as part of that, so you can see how that works. That piece of equipment, hands down, the best thing I ever put money into as far as processing birds. And it was an amount of money, right? Like, actually, I didn't put money into it. Somebody gave it to me, but it is an investment that you need to... I think it's worth working in. I've looked at how... I think the Scalder is somewhere around $400 or $500 right now. Worth it. Totally worth it. And I know it's a lot of money, but if you're going to be processing chickens time after time after time after time, it's way better than doing it on the 2 burners, propane outdoor stove, or whatever else you're using. Although that works too. And if you don't have the money for it, don't go into debt over it. That's my thought on the Scalder. So yeah, that class is selfreliancefestival.com if you guys want to sign up and take the class from Joel Salatin. From there, Chef Brett and I will walk people through processing. Depending on class size, we will add instructors as needed. 25 of the students go home with the bird, and everybody will get a copy of my chicken processing guide as part of that class. But that is the finances of the class. And I think it's just, as homesteaders, we say, hey, we're going to do a class, we're going to make money or get the work done for free. If that's your motivation, you're going to fail. If your motivation is to equip people with skills, with heritage skills, you won't fail. And in 2 ways. One, more people will come to your class because it's better, right? And then you make more money, and then maybe you do make money, because I usually make money on the classes that are here a little bit, and that helps offset the time that we have into these. But also, you're successfully equipping people to do things. So I do want most of the things we do here to be profitable, because that's how we stay in business. At the same time, I don't mind spending some of the money on the food I eat for the chickens this year. That's totally fine with me. And I actually think next year we will continue to not do the Cornish cross, because I really did like how much cleaner it was to process the birds, how much cleaner they were, lower impact on the grass and everything as we moved them around. Like, all around, prefer the heritage breed. Not everybody will make that decision, though, the way I have. Anyway, I have 4 questions starred, and we're going to motor through those. The first one is Jenni doing carnivore? Yes. In fact, she's doing it under doctor's advisement. So there you go. Doctors are changing with the times too. Michael says, our yarrow really seems to prefer the higher, drier soils on our property. That's interesting, because where my yarrow is higher and drier. So Carrie must have known that when he threw them in there. Zipper88 says, do you prefer canning or freeze drying? What are the pros or cons to both? I prefer both, and it depends on what I am putting up. I like canned tomatoes. I like canned tomato sauce. I have freeze dried some, and it's good. Like, you can make tomato chips, or you can make tomato powder for your sauce. So from a storage standpoint, it'll store longer if you freeze dry it. But I prefer canned tomatoes for just everyday cooking. I prefer freeze-dried eggs. I prefer freeze-dried milk. I prefer freeze-dried broccoli. So I don't even know. I've never tried to can broccoli, but I have frozen broccoli. By the time you boil the heck out of broccoli in a jar, all I can imagine is that it's mush, and I wouldn't do that. That's the same with summer squash. I don't can it. I'll pickle it. So I prefer those freeze-dried. I prefer squash, the summer squash, freeze-dried or dehydrated. So it really depends. I think Pros and cons to both. Freeze drying is expensive. It's expensive to get the machine. You got to run the machine. It costs more. Like the investment into getting started with freeze drying is you're starting at $2,500 to $3,000. The investment to get started with canning, water bath canning, is probably $50. Less if you borrow equipment from a friend. So I think start by learning how to can if you have to choose between the two. Get really good at that. And if you're interested in freeze drying, find somebody with a freeze dryer who will let you test it and maybe do like give them money to use their freeze dryer from time to time until you know, yeah, I'm going to work this food into my rotation. Yesterday, I made chicken nuggets, which I forgot to talk about. And I had saved some of the breast meat from the chickens we processed this weekend and never froze it, cut them up into hunks. And I used my freeze dried powdered eggs because I'm in a lack of egg situation right now. Whipped those up and used it and then rolled them in some spiced up pork rind, which if you don't, you can do breadcrumbs if you eat wheat. I don't. So, and then I fried them into chicken nuggets and they were delicious. And the freeze-dried eggs worked fine for that. I do freeze-dried scrambled eggs. They work fine. And my goal with my freeze-dried food is not to store it for 20 years. I actually want it in the rotation. So I'll freeze-dry zucchini or zoodles, and then I want to use those zoodles in the winter. And the key to getting that done successfully is organizing your freeze-dried foods. And I didn't organize them very well last year, so I have reorganized my freeze-dried foods this year, so I use last year's food. But, I'm happy to use 5-year-old freeze-dried zoodles, and it's no big deal. So I have them. It's funny because I helped a friend do this at her house. I have them in like what's an ingredient versus pre-made meals, so that when I travel, I can take the pre-made meals in case I run into a situation where I can't find food that I can eat and not end up with the trots. So I don't know. I prefer them both. I ferment, I make cheese, I dry things, air dry, I dry things in the Excalibur, and I freeze dry. I do all of those things, and those are all tools in my quiver for preserving food for the winter. Freeze drying was the last thing I added, and the thing that put me over the line on it was that I could do whole meals and that they were very lightweight. And having moved to more of a ketovore approach to life, that means that I can make chilies and soups and stews and freeze dry it, or I can freeze dry ground beef or steak or pork chops and have that shelf stable when I'm traveling. And I'm traveling more now that more people are asking me to speak at their events. And I don't expect people to cater to my dietary restrictions because I have weird allergies. So I tend to travel with food because it's not their responsibility to make sure my allergy is handled. And in that way, I have easy access to food. So that kind of put me over the edge with it. Plus, I've been backpacking with Mom. Plus, I'm in a community of people around me who can also use the freeze dryer to freeze dry things. So it just made sense. It was more of a group, like community decision than individual. So that's all of my thoughts. I love freeze dryers. Freeze dried cheesecake is delicious. Freeze dried fruits are delicious. And like a freeze dried blueberry snack is nice. Again, I don't eat a lot of fruit, but I do have some freeze dried blueberries and blackberries. I'm looking at what I have. I haven't freeze dried pickles yet, but I think I might if I can like get my freeze dryer needs me to change the oil and do some maintenance on it, and it may have a repair in order 3 years in. So we'll see how that goes. But if it's back up and running, I might make pickle chips because it makes things crunchy, and that is super delicious. Next one is getting a plucker was huge for us. So this is from Michael Leonito. When we jumped on that finally, scalder would be nice someday. Yeah, a plucker, I would say plucker before scalder if you're making that choice. We had the Holler Homestead Mother Plucker for a long, long time. And that's one of my most famous videos on YouTube. And it's totally on an account that is not this account. It was just me putting a basketball in this barrel plucker we made. That barrel plucker, Ryan Steva now uses it, and he added like a shower attachment to make it easier to get the water in there and an on-off switch to it. So he's like, it's just out in the community now because I have a more commercially viable plucker that we use, and I didn't see keeping 2 pluckers, and that plucker was given to me as well. But having the plucker is huge. I can hand pluck chickens, and one year we had to hand pluck about 30 chickens because the mother plucker reset itself. Like we put too heavy of a chicken in it, and it made the motor reset, and I didn't know how to get it started again, so I just hand plucked a bunch of chickens. But it took a lot longer. I was a lot more tired that day, and I just sat there and I was just plucking the whole time while other people did the evisceration and the partsing and the packaging. So pluckers are great. I have never tried the drill plucker, that like the attachment you put on a drill. If anybody listening to this lives near me and has one of those, I would like to test one of those so I can tell people the difference between that. So anyway, with that, guys, we've reached the end of the show. If you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, you can do it in 2 ways. One, get your coffee at hollerroast.com. 2, consider becoming a member. Head over to livingfreeintennessee to find out more. And if you're on the live stream seeing this awesome mug that was made by Rachel, and Rachel has an Etsy store and you can buy them too. It's a handmade pottery coffee mug with LFTN's logo on them. She did a great job with these. I highly recommend checking out her Etsy store. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week.